really unusual, certainly orthodox research on the history of Christianity he would like to share. And while I may or may not agree with his research, it's certainly unusual enough, original enough that, in my opinion, it deserves presentation. George.
Okay, Jim. I'll now just put the reader's eye onto, or the listener's eyes onto the image that I've pre-prepared on my other computer, and that is of the massive Christianity fraud and all the characters that are involved in it. Yeah, that is at the top left there. It is a statue of Josephus Flavius, and in my estimation, that is the nickname for the author of the Christian Bible. The naming of the global police his name is Piso, and that is Arius Calpurnius Piso. He has a whole series of nicknames. Some of them are on that slide. One of them is Fania, and his name is Arius Piso, and that is Alpha to Omega on that corporate sign for P and O, and that is the Piso family cruises. Yeah, all of it is a massive piss take, and that is the naming of their family, and all the little piggy stories and the poems that have been written through the whole of world history is to cover this cleverest man that ever lived. But he, in the launch of Judaism and other religions, he also launched the Quran, and he did that in 150 AD before they released it several hundred years later. I think it was 800 AD that they released it in Mecca, and that is the biggest, cause of division in almost every war that we've ever had. Yeah, and it's still the massive terror base, and none of that terror is real, and I think you understand that already, that all of it is to cover simply the world's richest people. So everybody on that screen are millionaires, and all of them some of them are just trivial comics. That one with the papal hat on in the middle with the label Smithy, he's a member of a comedy cast with that man that plays Rob Brydon, that is depicted on the P&O shipping line's image with the sun god Saul beside him. That is their biggest sin. So Jesus has completely replaced the sun god Sol Natalis Invictus, and all of that has happened in 2,200 years, and the faking up of the birth of Jesus is the launch of the papal families that I'm going to tell you about, that were Arius Calpurnius Piso's bloodlines. So there's Jennifer Aniston. One of his nicknames and pen names for faking up the story is Aniston, another is Fania, and that is her vagina, and all of it, that's why she gets her vagina out in the movies that she makes. And there she is playing the role of the Panthera character, which is another pen name for Piso. Yeah, that's Ariston Pants Hera, and Hera is the former god in the heavens with Zeus in the Greek god team. And what happened was that when they released the Bible in Naples, that's better known as Pompeii, the Vesuvius erupted onto their home, and that's called the Villa Papyri, and there are very few secrets in the story if you're intelligent and you're objective and you look at all of the evidence. So Christopher Martin is directly descended from the Flavian Josephus family, and that is one of his favourite nicknames. If you see anybody citing anything on religious history or global history, very often it's Tacitus or Josephus. All of those are just nicknames for the same man, and his birth dates are on the next slide, and there all of them become so one of his nicknames is Montanus, and that launches the Queen's cousins, the Montagues, all of the families that are the Dukes of Buccleuch, and all of them are billionaires now, and most of them are descended from Charlemagne, and that every residual monarchy in the world is descended from Charlemagne, and he was sainted in 800 AD too, and that he went to the Vatican in Rome to get that done. And that one there on the top right of the image is President Higgins in sectarian Ireland, where we've been fighting over religious division, Catholic versus Protestant, for many, many years now. And all the folk within me reporting the fact that even the terrorists in Ireland are descended from the popes. Martin McGuinness's middle name was Pacelli, and all of that is the papal bloodlines. Yeah, and that is absolutely massive. That all of it is launched by the royals and the world's richest families, just to keep the people in fear and the ordinary people on the streets fighting against each other and hating them for the stories that all of whom were written by Piso. So Christopher Martin is a fabulous singer with Coldplay. He got his degree in ancient world history at University College London. He's a first-class degree holder, and all of the Coldplay singers are the same. Yeah, so they're all experts in ancient world history, and the real Christopher Martin, I don't know if he's in the same bloodline as both the Pope and the Bible fake-up, and also the real Christopher Martin in later world history was the role that he played as the money man on the Mayflower. And all of that is projected on videos made by the BBC. The videos about Vesuvius erupting, when they released the New Testament in 79 AD, the surviving members of the family decided to move to Greece because there's no volcanoes there, and what they did there was to replace all the gods that the pagans had worshipped. Yeah, and that is a whole team of gods, and you might have seen some of the movies that Hollywood have made on that. That is Jason and the Argonauts and Zeus and Hera, you know, lording it up there in the heavens, and all the names that are in the aristocracy, even in the Irish Troubles. Guinness is the god. Insus was the inscription on Jesus' cross, and that is Ineos, the BP derivative. Yeah, that's John Wood in Aberdeen, and the massive wealth that all of them have gotten by stealing the oil reserves, and that's in the Garden of Eden, is Aden, and that is the BP plant that was carpet bombed by Harold Wilson, and then Sir Alec Douglas Home, who's my neighbour in the Scottish borders. And Wilson is a Bilderberger as Labour's leader. Yeah, that's the left-wing parties in Britain, Jim. And he also smoked the Piso pipe. It's just a massive syndicate. There are no real left-wingers in politics. And the actor that is now playing the leader of the Labour Party in Britain, he was David Kelly in the scams about Tony Blair being the man that sold the weapons in South Africa, and all of it. Yeah, the Bush family, I told you in the last interview, they are directly descended from this lot, and it's just amazing. And there's all now the gods have been demonized as being tiny little dwarfs, and all the jokers in the billionaire listings now, they now appear on the telly with dwarfs in their adverts, and that is them taking the piss out of their creator. And I believe that that creator determines their pathologies and their lifespan, which is why within 6 weeks of the making of that video on Martin McGuinness and the terrorist activities, he was dead with a lethal cancer. And sadly it's the same with some of Britain's richest people. They were the runners of the British Legion, and so the Duke of Westminster with 14 billion in the bank was about, I think he was about 50th or 40th on the Forbes rich list, but he ran the British Legions for profit. And that is all the war dead all across the globe, and that's the reason that Queenie would not lay the wreath this year, because she's in the bloodline with Arius Copernicus Piso, and the Bushes and the Murrays that were their ancestors, and all of that. I've just discovered today that Franklin D. Roosevelt is also in the same bloodlines, and he's out of sectarian Holland, and that's the massive Orange division that every one of the European wars has been fought in the name of Jesus Christ, and that's only after they got rid of the pagans. So Jennifer Aniston is depicted there, and she is Ariston, which is the pen name for Piso, and I'll cite the PDF when I get to the next slide, but there is the pistics they make about the gods. The Colossus of Rhodes was a massive statue, and it's depicted as being a god to equal the god in the heavens, and what the god in the heavens did to that was that he launched a massive earthquake in Rhodes, and it totally fell to the ground in pieces. Yeah, and that's what the gods are capable of, and that's what they did in Vesuvius, and that's why Pigott Smith, who plays Pliny the Elder in the BBC movie about Vesuvius and the eruption of that, he was, the Pigott Smiths are direct descendants of Pliny the Elder, and Pliny the Younger played a huge role in the writing and publishing, not the publishing of the Bible. That was the Roman emperors that took that on after the sun god Saul had been completely replaced. Anyway, let me move on to the next slide. And there's a picture of Josephus, the essential writings, and that is Arius Copernicus Piso's pen name too. And so if we go down, so he had the temerity and the front to name himself in the false story about Jesus. He named himself St. Peter in that story. That's the first bishop of Rome, is the author of the fake Bible, and his name is Arius Copernicus Piso, born 37 C Church of England, died 118 Church of England, and he was a Jew, and he faked up the Christian Bible, and it is the biggest cause of sectarian division in world history. And that is the launch at the same time of Islam, and the reason Donald shifted the American embassy in the Middle East from to Jerusalem again was that Tel Aviv, where it was before, is where the Quran was printed. Yeah, and that's Donald's wife from the Austro-Hungarian river valleys that launched all the wars. And she's now, I told you that she's now best friends with Wendy Deng, and they go on massively expensive shopping trips together all over the world. She moved into Washington so she could be with Wendy Deng, and Wendy Deng has been the lover of Tony Blair, who took us into Iraq with George W. Bush on his side. And I told you in the earlier videos how the Bushes live in Maine in the mansion called Vesuvius, because they're in the same bloodline as the Queen of England and all the folk that have launched this massive scam all around the world. And there is Arius Piso's initials, Alpha to Omega, on the Paschal candle that I, as a Catholic altar boy, used to parade around with in the Easter celebrations. Yeah. So there is that Paschal candle, Alpha at the top, Omega at the bottom, same as the P and O shipping lines, and that other story that I told you involving the Brydens. Rob Brydon, that is on that image there. Oh, sorry. Oh, it's Jennifer, don't look. Yeah, all of them have no shame. She gets her kit off in all the movies, and that is Telly Savalas played the role of Herod in some of the movies, and that is Herod that beheaded John the Baptist in the story, and all of the paintings that they've created become worth more than the economy of some of the smaller countries in our world. So Herod was actually in Rome and Naples when the Bible was being written up, and that's the launch of globalism. And his ally in that story is Emperor Augustus, and that is the launch of Donald's golf courses and the master race all over the world. So Augusta is the name of your championship course for the world's masters, and all of them are Arrian family members, and many are descended from Arius Piso, which is the launch of the Flavians, and that is the avian beekeeper's hat for the popes. And that is the massive joke about, even in the Gladiator movie, they compliment each other on being busy bees. So that is the Flavian dynasty that lived in a place called Fala, and that is the residence for the Roosevelts in Britain, and for the Murrays that were the ancestors of George W. and his family. They live in a town called Selkirk, which is only 10 miles from me, and I've been jailed in Selkirk for telling all of these truths by the Chipping Norton set, which was represented by my crooked wife, and she is a member of the Chipping Norton set. Have you seen the terror news in Britain this week? And
tell us, George, tell us.
So there's a massive Windrush scandal, and that takes you right back for 70 years to another ethnic hatred issue, which was the importation into Britain of cheap labour in a boat called the Windrush, and that was demonised nearly 70 years ago now by a man called Enoch Powell. And all of what they're doing is proclaiming that this Windrush boat and the evil story around that is about the demonisation of the black man, that the black man is going to have the whip over the white man if we let them keep coming into our countries. Yet God gave us a world without boundaries, but we've gone across those boundaries and we've killed all of God's pagans. The joke about Windrush is that there are 7 baronets in the Chipping Norton area for David Cameron's lethal syndicate. That is Windrush is the name and address of 7 baronets in Chipping Norton, and that is in Oxfordshire. And this is the biggest issue in my life so far, because Oxford, Cambridge, Göttingen and Heidelberg were immune from bombing throughout World War II. And the bastards that run YouTube have deliberately taken the soundtrack off that video ever since it was published. You can only look at the images of the massively impressive structures that are the buildings in those 4 major cities. They were chosen because there are more prime ministers and German chancellors in those cities than anywhere else in the history of those warmongering countries. And the monarchy that run them are the same on both sides. And that's why I'm thrilled to bits that I've discovered that the Windsor changed their name after World War I, because they were totally ashamed of the role in that, and then they did the same thing in the 39 Steps to the World Wars. Have you read the 39 Steps novel?
No, I haven't.
It's a classic in Britain, but it's just the piss take that we started the war in 1939, and the folk that wrote it were the Buckens, and they are in the presidential bloodlines through the Stuart dynasty that were Mary Queen of Scots, and all the people get beheaded because of everything that they do in the royal families, and it's all really ruthless. And they eventually, King Henry becomes, that's Henry VIII, I think he executed 4 of his wives so he could have male babies, and that never happened, and that is an act of God too, in my estimation. That's why the evil bloodlines run down, and the gods determine that. That's why David Cameron's had children die. Nicola Sturgeon, who's the boss in Scotland, all of them have had miscarriages and massive deaths of their children, and it's quite tragic, but that's what the gods do in response to stealing from the whole world. So Cameron's syndicate runs the Chip and Norton set. He's got comedians in it like that one there, who's Smithy in a comedy called Gavin and Stacey, but he is James Corden, and he's on the first of the Papal bloodlines too. Yeah, all of them are descended from that, and that man there above the word Montanus is Rob Brydon, and he has a massive Habsburg chin, and that's in there on the P&O ad. He's got 82. My MP was Michael Moore, and he was Secretary of State for Scotland, but he had to resign because he refused to meet me, and that's a breach of the UK Constitution. He had 82 directorates with George W. Bush on the P&O shipping lines, and that is the piss take that we are Piso. Yeah, and we are taking everybody on vacation all over the world that used to belong to the indigenous pagans, and there are none of them left. So, and I think I told you in the earlier video that the horse is associated with the Pisos, which is why it's associated with horse racing all over the world. And I've released this week the news that let me tell you the Pope's names and how they link to Piso. So the PDF that inspired me so much and shocked me completely was, it's all one word, Calpurnius Piso family, and what do you call the little symbol that is and? Ampersand, is it?
Yes.
The origin of popes.pdf, and you will find the whole of the history of Arius Calpurnius Piso's nicknames. Yeah, and one of them is Josephus, and there are the Flavians. That's Vespasian, Titus and Domitian were the launch of the Flavian breakaway after Arius Calpurnius had passed on, and that is now in the hands of the emperors. And I think I've told you the stories about Marcus Aurelius's ancestry, and that him being descended to the boss at Harvard who's Drew Faust, and all his female relatives in Rome were Fausts and Faustinas. It's absolutely massive, and that's your most admired universities. All of them are Christian frauds, and the naming of Louisville, where KFC lives, it's all part of that sectarian diaspora out of the Louis dynasty, and that is Louis XIV up to 16th that were involved in the massive French Revolution. And Colonel Saunders is 22nd cousin to the Queen of England. It's just absolutely astounding. They've got the front to be the most brutal people in world history, and then they want you to worship them as they lay the poppy wreaths for their ancient relatives in Rome. That's Poppaea was married to Nero, and the Pisos had him topped. Yeah, so the papal bloodline, this is the big, it completely stunned me. St. Peter is actually, he never lived, he is actually another pen name, and he's the output of the Piso pen, and he is Arius Calpurnius Piso. Yeah, born 37, died 118, Church of England. Next one is St. Linus, he's Pliny the Younger. Yeah, born 62-63, died 116. St. Cletus is Pope Alexander, his name is Alexander C. Piso, eldest son of Arius. St. Clement is Julius C. Piso, next eldest son. St. Aristus is Proculus C. Piso, son of Arius Piso, and we're now up to 79 AD. Yeah, and that is the launch of the story and the beginning to start thinking about getting it published. And then you've got St. Alexander the First equals Alexander C. Piso the Second, circa 90 CE. St. Sixtus equals Justus C. Piso, son of Arius C. Piso, born 77. They don't have a date of death for him. And then you get into Telesphorus, and that is St. Telesphorus was the Bishop of Rome number 8, and his real name is Flavius Arrianus, grandson of Arius Piso. And then St. Higgins equals Silenus C. Piso, and that is the launch of Higgins as the president in Ireland, in sectarian Ireland. And all of them. So Ian Paisley, have you heard of him?
Yeah, sure, of course.
So he's a sectarian Protestant, and I think McGuinness was fighting against him, and he is Ian Paisley, and that is the Piso Paisley Abbey in Glasgow. And all of it is the knights that say the Monty Pythons, when they laugh at things, you know it's a joke about what happened in world history. And that's why they appear in the stable at Bethlehem, with the three wise men. Do you know the three wise men in the Christmas story? What are they in the real world history? Yeah, it's Winston Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt. Yeah, and James Blunt sings about it quite openly. Where are we now? And that is him proclaiming that all of them, he is a descendant of the Winston Churchill's Batman. His name was Desmond Morton, and they are the Earls of Morton that were partly behind the London Bridge terror, because the woman Palmer Tompkinson is descended from Morton, and she was Prince Charles' lover at one time in the ancient past. And all of them are Montefiore relatives, and that is the first women to marry into the Rothschild family outside their own brothers and sisters and cousins. It's absolutely massive. And that is Moses Montefiore. He lived on the south coast of England, and all of it. So Arius Copernicus Piso was actually a Jew, and he went all over the Roman world, and all of his nicknames are used to make. So he's Joseph in the Bible story, and they've got a numerical code, and his code number is 60, and all across the world that is used as a joke. You get your bus pass in Scotland when you get to the age of 60, and they're going to impose, since I came along and exposed all of this, toxic drugs. When people get to the age of 60 in the NHS, they're going to be given statins, and all my research on that all around the world has led to the banning of statins as horribly toxic drugs. But the story I'm telling now about the Windsors involves one of the drug designers that was one of my personal friends, and his name is Trevor Jones. So the Windsors changed their name after that First World War, and they were Saxe-Coburg then, and that's Prince Albert. He did not sire any of the Queen's babies, as you learned from Greg Hallett. And that is because he was a homosexual, and he wore a Prince Albert chain through his penis, so he could not have sexual congress. Yeah, and all of that, there were hundreds of pictures of a Prince Albert's chain when I learned that from you and Greg Hallett. Or it might have been the Swedish or the Red Ice Radio people that interviewed him as well. There were hundreds of them as Google images. Now you can only find the one that's on my website. It's absolute massive, yeah. And every film that is made is a cover for these sordid historic events, and it's just absolutely stunning that they can get away with it for so long. So do not look now at the picture. Just watch them. Jennifer Aniston is living with the legacy of being named after Ariston, which was the nickname. So glance, keep your eyes almost closed, and you'll just see what she does in the social media. Sorry. Oh, it's not going to move.
You can't change this slide.
I can't get it to move to the next one. I thought it just pressed the up button. Oh, there she is. So that's Aniston, named after Ariston, and that is one of the other nicknames that is funnier. And in those pictures, it's not obvious, but the next one it is. Yeah, there she is, and she's not an Aryan blonde. If you look at the truth, that's her Piso vagina. Yeah, will you get away with this in America? And there is the huge scams that I've explained to you already. Jesus is the dragon in the Bible. Yeah, and that is the naming of El Nino. Yeah, the baby Jesus dollies that were traded in the South Pacific are the joke that El Nino. If you look up El Nino on Google Images now, maybe not tomorrow, you will see that El Nino is either the baby Jesus. If you hit El Nino on religion and then you hit El Nino on weather, you'll see the joke that it is the replacement of the gods that create the global weather patterns and all of our floods and all of our earthquakes and all of our landslides. That's why Donald's regime has been more expensive than any other one in world history, even although he's only served for a year and a half or whatever it is. Yeah, and all the folk that are in the bloodlines, the Baldwins of Hollywood, are massively in the story. That is the Windsor naming thing. Let me get this out of the way. So there is St. Boniface, and you now know that Oprah Winfrey is descended from him, and his real name is Mr. Winfred of Devon, and that becomes heaven, and that is Exeter in Devon, and that becomes Xmas, and that is the signature on Jesus' birth certificate, because he never lived. Yeah? So do you remember that it was mentioned above that Julius Piso called his father a dragon in Revelations? That is the 66th number of the beast chapter in the Christian Bible, and all of it is a Pisopistic. That was because by doing so, naming his father a dragon, he was also pointing out that his father was a baby boy, as that is what the word used for dragon refers to. He too was saying that Arius Piso was Jesus. And the Pythons, Monty Pythons, when they come into the stable and they laugh at all of that, you know it's a huge joke. And all of it wraps into the naming of the world's richest people, and all of them having Alois in their middle name. But even the no room at the inn is based on the birthplace not of Jesus but of the Pope and Hitler Rothschild. They were born in the Innsbruck River Valley, and it is absolutely pathetic that only when we can read and write that are they prepared to climb down. But I've now published on my website, if you look up Windrush on my website, you'll see what they're prepared to do in the name of false terror. It's 70 years old and they still keep dragging it up, and one of our politicians has had to resign because of the demonization of the black man, and all of it is just out of the slaving cities. Gladstone lived in Liverpool, and that is he was a slaving billionaire in his day, and he was the longest lived Prime Minister Britain has ever had. So there are the pictures of the folk that now think they're gods. Shania Twain was married to a mutt, and that is a king of Egypt in the bloodlines that George W. Bush is also in, because all of them pretend that they descend from King David in the biblical story, and all of it is faked up. And gods are actually, in the biblical story, they are the giant that was Goliath, that David slayed with a slingshot. And it's absolutely humorous when you learn it. And that's why in some of the videos that I make, I cannot stop giggling. But there is a picture of St. Peter on the right hand side. He never lived. And there is the statue of the tiny little baby Jesus that is the gift. Magellan discovered all of the South Pacific, that's Australia, New Zealand and the south coast of Asia, and when they landed and they met the pagan owners of those lands and those islands, they gave them little dollies of El Nino, and in exchange for that they converted them to Christianity. And that is the massive scam. So in the Philippines, where they had massive storms, and I was beginning to learn this story, and they still use the Piso coinage, yeah, they had massive earthquakes. Do you know what the capital city of the Philippines is? Think of False Christmas and you might get a clue. So it's Bonifacio. So that is the man that was the person who cut down Thor's oak. Yeah, and the oak is the icon for the pagan, and that's why Winston Churchill, the Queen's dad in your stories with Greg Hallett, that's why they, as Holy Roman German serial killers, that is the Battle of Blenheim and the naming of his massive mansion. Blenheim has more oak trees per acre than any other place in the world, and that is Winston Churchill and the launch of the bunny sign, which is right at the top of the Queen's bloodline, which is Lagos the Rabbit of Macedonia, and that is right around the era of the biggest empire in the world at that time, and that was the Macedonian Empire for what's his name? Alexander the Great. Yeah, and that's the Alexander name that has been used and nicked by several of those papal lines. So can I just tell you, it'll take me a wee bit of time to so Shania Twain's the wife, and what God did to her was to take her voice away for a full decade when she was in her prime, and that is she got vast tracts of land from New Zealand, and that is Helen Clark, and all the stories that Greg Hallett did not tell you about life in New Zealand. She has a riding track that takes up huge acreages of New Zealand, and she was gifted that by Helen Clark. She then became the head of the UN, and she stole, according to Greg, I don't know if it was on your show, she stole several $1 million from the UN, and the UN is run, all of it is on the Rothschild payroll. The whole of global policing is on the Rothschild payroll, and that is Jackie Celebi, the head of Interpol. I can show you anytime you ask for it my letters to him. Yeah, none of them get replied to because all of them are bought and owned by Evelyn de Rothschild and his wife Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. And the Forrester joke is that she's in the earliest Queen's bloodlines in Britain, because that is the forest that was in Windsor, and that is so the earliest reference to Windsor occurs in 1066 with William the Conqueror. The family that becomes the Queen's bloodline was launched, and they were then called Windsor, and that is Windesore. The bit on the end is Martin Sorrell. I need to make a few more images before I can explain all of that, but Martin Sorrell is a huge business empire all across the world, and he's I can't forget what it's plastic something. What was his company called?
Whose company, George?
Martin Sorrell. He's a billionaire advertising executive, goes to Davos, Bilderberg and all the fascist meetings, and he runs a company that is one of the biggest in the world called WPP, and I believe that will be named after Windsor, Piso et al. But what it actually means is wire and plastic, and that is why now the powers that be are demonizing the plastic that is drifting around in the world's oceans, and all of it. So even Bill Gates's quest against polio, can you guess in a context of religion why polio is something big for Bill Gates?
No, you tell me.
It's another nickname for Piso. Yeah, and it's just amazing. And that is Bill Gates that went to Harvard with Drew Faust as the boss, and Kevin Spacey and the Baldwins of Hollywood are directly descended from Piso, and that's why they made The Usual Suspects movie. Have you seen it?
I don't believe I have.
That's a really good one. You cannot go through life without watching The Usual Suspects, because Baldwin of Hollywood is in it. In the lineup that they do early in the movie, the cops have got them pinned as suspects, and they are actually the rulers of the world for all that time. So Baldwin of Hollywood is actually, way back in the Holy Land massacres, Baldwin of Jerusalem. And it's the same for Conrad Black. He's a Conradian of Jerusalem. You remember him? He was the newspaper magnate in Canada, and they put him in jail for a token period. And it's just absolutely stunning. So here they're in panic now. The Queen refuses to lay the wreaths and things, and the Jesus dragon story that I keep telling now has led to the shutting down of the Dragon's Den on the telly every Saturday night. And you must have loads of trivial programs in America. But the other folk that are in that image, so that's Dolly Parton is the Parthenon, and that is where they went. The Pisos went out of Vesuvius's range into Greece in the later stages of that dynasty's life, and they're not dead yet. If you look, did you ever have a look at the little CIS website that I referred you to in the last interview?
George, I don't believe I have. Tell me.
So just look at the number of folk that have the letters P and I at the beginning of their name. It's a huge piss take. So if you're a celebrity and you're born into one of these lethal families, you can either become a politician and an actor, and that is in the Gulliver's Travels movie, and the most enjoyable version of that features Richard Harris, who plays Marcus Aurelius in the movies, and that's how they keep doing it. But when they do it too often and right in the face of God, God brings them down on set, and that's happened many, many times. So all the religious comedies, including the Pythons, that's the life of Brian, the actor that played Brian on the cross. He died in his 40s. Yeah, and they do not see it coming, but they do now, which is why all of the Pixar star that was Steve Jobs, was it? Steve?
Yeah.
So he died 60, and that's the Piso code number for the man that wrote the Bible. And it's just amazing that none of them see it coming. But all of those Pixar movies, like Toy Story, it's just now the covers for the fabulous dynasties that were the Capetans. That's the Hugh Capet and the naming of Cape Town in South Africa, and that's the massive Boer Wars and the Zulu Wars that were fought against the indigenous people, and that is the De Beers empires and everything that was launched. And you know the Jackie O story? So Jackie O's third partner after Onassis, he's a massive mafia man, and that's the Miller sisters that become the monarchy all over Europe. But Jackie O's third partner was Templesman, and he's a De Beers director, and that is actually the De Veres that were of Northumberland in the Alnwick castle that the Percy family live in, and that's friends of the Queen, and they're all over the transcript. That's the Duke of Northumberland, and he was Perseus the poet in the bloodline in ancient Rome. Yeah, and that's the making in those regions, and in that massive castle they have. Every massive castle across Europe with the Christian launch is right next door to a church, and that's the cathedrals in many of the homes. And the best example of that is Otterburen in Germany, and that is exactly the same name as Otterburn in the Scottish borders, where the Percys were massacred by the Douglas family, and all of them are descended from Arius Calpurnius Piso's nicknames. That's the Montanus Montague bloodlines, and that is Montgomery and his... Did I tell you about Montgomery's grandchild being the news reporter for the BBC at the White House in America now?
No, that's terrific.
Well, her name is Catty Kay, and she's the great granddaughter or in-law of Field Marshal Montgomery, that was the head of the 8th Army all across North Africa. Yeah, and all of them are friends of Hitler, and many of them are relatives. You just need to look at my videos that I've made on Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. All of it has been published by the newspapers in Britain, but none of them see the significance of the people in the middle that are called Hillary.
You use a few minutes that remain to draw together the various threads of what you've been presenting here today.
Well, so basically what I'm telling you is that the families that were in charge of the world in ancient Rome are still in charge of the world, which is why the Bushes call their mansion Vesuvius. And everybody that lives in Palm Beach and O'Donnell's places, where he's got his massive mansions, all of them are out of the global diaspora to found the...
Why don't you turn the computer back to you so we can hear you as you complete this program?
I don't know how to do that. Sorry, you can't hear me well.
No, we can hear you fine. We just couldn't see you.
All right.
So let's sit down now.
Yeah. So
you don't need your camera.
Oh, I do. This is how I make my YouTube videos.
Well, go right ahead, George.
I forgot what.
Tie together your loose ends here.
So, the Star Wars threat. You understand that Carrie Fisher and the death of her mother in the same week, that is now spookily happening all through the celebrity. Yeah, and when you look up Jennifer Aniston, they're pining for a guy called Bill Paxton, and I think he made the sinking of the Titanic movies and things like that. So the gods that appear to have been asleep for the whole of the 20th century, when we had those 2 world wars, they're now rising up, and the pathologies that are occurring in those elite families are absolutely stunning. And when you report something like that on the media, and the people then drop down dead within a few weeks, it's quite stunning. And I've met several folk that are in the McGuinness family bloodline, but that's what happened to him when I revealed that he's a papal descendant. And I've got no way of controlling any of that. And even the folk that are... have you seen the... Oh no, I better not tell you. So Maggie Smith, she's in that Pigott Smith bloodline. I believe that she's descended from Poppaea in the Roman court. She played Jean Brodie, and all of that is the fascist stories. The whole of world governance is fascism, but now in Britain we're not allowed to smack our kids. So when a professor that's educated and objective comes along and is prepared to release the stories that would have sent you to the wall in the old days, it's got them all in a state of panic. So I'm taking on the Star Wars team, and even in the earliest mansions in the Windsor area, they're also got forests all over. That's Nottingham Forest, belonged to the Queen of England, and that is the Windsors that are related. I can't explain it in one video. We'd have to make a series of them on how the whole of the genealogical steps have happened. But all the folk that were in the Frankfurt ghetto were in the Roman families too, and that's the Frankfurt ghetto where they pretend that it was impoverished, but all of them are out of there. So Theresa May's out of there, and I've told you all about the Austrian nobility renaming themselves, and that is the Austrian nobility that are still on the Committee of 300 as the world's richest people. And Yvette Cooper, who's part of the Windrush baronetcies, she's married to Ed Balls, and all of them are billionaires, and that is the people that are in that Windrush scam that they pretend is about racism. It's just to cover the syndicate that runs the world under Murdoch's thrall. And I believe that's why we would lost the sound system on Skype, because we're touching at their biggest secrets in that bloodline. He's related.
I can't thank you enough for sharing your research on these exotic subjects. It's really quite remarkable indeed. This is Jim Fencer, your host on The Real Deal, thanking my special guest, George Wees, for being here, and all of you for watching.
Thank you, Jim. Ever so kind of you. Okay?
You got it, George.
Cheers. Talk soon.
Talk soon.